All right, we are rolling. So good morning, and we're really excited to have, this is a big group for Sip and Smith, and we're really excited to have everyone here. I'm very excited to have Charity talk to us about her sustainable jewelry and her history with it and her process and what she's doing with it next. And um, we'd love to know where people are from and how they found out about us. So if you just put a note in the chat how you came to our Sip and Sense this morning, we'd love to be able to include that with anything we post subsequently on social media, and we'll let Charity take it from here.
Okay, so hello, my name is Charity Ridpath, and I make sculptural and wearable jewelry from single-use plastics. To get us started, I will be sharing the story of how my current work, which is called Year of Plastic, began. I will then touch on how I collect materials, how I approach making jewelry using this unconventional material, and how nature acts as my inspiration. This should only take about 10 to 15 minutes. So afterwards, we will all have time to answer any questions or ask questions y'all have, and then start up a conversation about sustainability in our home and studio practice. So this is where it kind of began. This is a picture of the park I used to play in when I was in elementary school. It didn't look like this then, but this was just below the surface. So close that once my friends and I discovered that we could unearth trash treasures by digging into the ground with sticks, it became routine in our playtime. Part archaeological dig, part adornment for our mud castles. The park actually closed when I was still a frequent visitor, and a fence was mysteriously erected around its perimeter. But I was full grown when I learned that the reason my friends and I could dig up trash treasures was because our park was actually built on top of a landfill. The park closed to visitors when they discovered erosion had unearthed illegally dumped pesticides and other toxic materials. So the landfill below my park was closed in 1955. And the realization that this mess was created 15 years before disposable plastic bags and other single-use plastics were used in the United States blew my mind. If this is my baseline before single-use plastics, what does our future hold now that we have them? This question inspired me to wonder how complicit I am in creating the next landfill playground. So I started collecting any plastic that I would otherwise put in my recycling bin with the plan to do this for 1 year. But this collection grew unruly in a matter of months. To be honest, before I started collecting, I had considered myself to be pretty eco-conscious. But after a few months of collecting, I realized how easy it was for me to understand only 1 week of my trash at a time. Turns out I was not as good for the planet as I thought. As this pile of plastic began to grow, I had to start changing my expectations for this project. Unfortunately, I needed to narrow down the materials I held back. Otherwise, the pile would swallow me and my studio with it. This is one of the reasons I started to use transparent plastics. One, it made up the bulk of my collection, and two, it inspired me the most in my material experiments. I was particularly drawn to how this transparent plastic interacted with light. And like layering washes in watercolor, the plastic created different and varying qualities when two or more overlapped. This was the first ring I made for this body of work. It is made from a salad container and tube set with silver bezel wire. The shapes of each of the layers were inspired by the winged seed of a maple tree. Early on, I had this romantic idea that I would spend a year collecting materials and use up all of those materials by the end of that year. It is now almost 3 years later, and I'm still working from that collection. I am starting to make a dent though, so that's nice. This is a view of the stages of work, the stages my work goes through. It might start off as a berry container, which I then cut up into each of its components: the rim of the lid, the flat top and bottom, the sides that might be wavy or have a curve to it. The middle hand is holding up pieces that I've cut in preparation for a winged seed necklace that looks a lot like the slide before. The oconite orb was actually born of necessity. I started having a lot of scraps of rims and little pieces. And so I created this technique using only those parts. And the smallest scraps are then saved in jars for a future piece. I didn't set out to make work that looked like anything specific, but instead experimented with the materials. These are the first 6 weeks of this exploration. From here, I started to learn how I preferred to work with each material I had collected. It was really important that I didn't feel precious about anything. I didn't want to worry if I had a potential finished product. I was just making samples, no big deal. That said, the sample that inspired the mushroom bracelet and its beginning stages are photographed here. And I'll show you in the next slide. So if you look at the image on the right, the smaller piece at the bottom, that is what started my inspiration. As the sample grew, I started to see that it looked like the gills of a mushroom. And I remember being so excited to make a mushroom bracelet that I just jumped right in. So the sample would have been too small, so I had to get started on a bigger one, which you can see up at the top, and then of course the finished product to the left. Once it was finished, I was surprised that where I saw a mushroom, other people have seen cave formations and an eye too. I love seeing the similarities when these comparisons are made. Here are 3 other examples of how those samples reminded me of natural formations or phenomena. The first is a brooch that looks like the sedimentary layers of an ocean cliffside. The middle is a brooch made from fused and layered bubble wrap that reminds me of the microscopic image of a strand of hair. And the right is a ring made from a salad container that reminds me of atmospheric perspective. I recently made a series of rings from fused bubble wrap. Some of my early experiments reminded me of mineral formations. With this as my starting point, I started to collect images of minerals and use them as a reference as I made, which isn't my typical technique. This one is called quartz and is made to look like the image of quartz on the lower right side. My favorite techniques tend to be the ones that are highly repetitive and don't require me to heat up the plastic. This is the oconite orb that I referenced earlier. I have several of these orbs that I make when I just want to get lost in the flow of creating. One day they may become something more significant, but I don't have any plans for them yet. As I move through this plastic collection, I can look at the materials that didn't speak to me immediately, but now hold a freshness. This is a ring I made just a few months ago. It is made from a white grocery bag with a red logo. To make this, I created a silver ring band with a loom frame where a gem might go and built this plastic gem up one loop of plastic at a time. I love the texture this weaving creates. So I also love working sculpturally, but I also love translating these techniques into smaller and wearable pieces, which I sell in the shop on my website. I also have been daydreaming about making non-wearable sculptures recently, big ones. This pair of earrings uses a similar technique as the winged seed fan, but were inspired by and named after one of my favorite insects, the moth. I have fully created a strange love-hate relationship with single-use plastic. It inspires me daily, which gives me great joy and purpose, but the more I learn about it, the more its impacts on our planet truly hurts my heart. I funnel those feelings into inspiration to turn my home zero waste, hoping that one day I will no longer be able to source materials from my own waste stream. And that's it. Thank you guys all for being here.